I now invite all the three speakers and the moderator for the second session to take their seat on stage. Mr. Bun Nagara, please. And all the three speakers, distinguished Professor Datuk Dr. Shamsul Amri Baharudin, Your Excellency Professor Ayatullah Sheikh Mahdi Hadavi Tehrani, and Mr. Ernest Z. Bauer. Judging from the active participation, I suppose we need more time for Q&A, and for that, perhaps maybe Mr. Nagara will allow around 10 minutes for every speakers for the presentation. Professor Ulung, Datuk Dr. Shamsul Amri. While waiting for one of the speakers, I would like to give some of the background of our moderator. Mr. Bun Nagara is an award-winning journalist, a political analyst, and also press columnist, as well as associate editor of The Star, a leading English newspaper in Malaysia. And Mr. Nagara is also a visiting fellow at ISIS, and his writing contribution spans over issues on international or local politics, and he has produced thousands of media analysis as well as papers in international conferences the world over. I now hand over the session to Mr. Bun Nagara. Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause for our speakers and moderator for the second session. Mr. Bun Nagara, if you please.
Welcome to the second session on the future for diversity, dialogue, and peaceful coexistence. We are still looking for the first panelist, Professor Dr. Shamsul. Is he in the building?
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
Right. As we wait for the professor to come onto the stage, let me just say a few words about the second session. We are here to focus on three factors in particular: diversity, dialogue, and peaceful coexistence. Let us see how they relate and what we can and should do about them. There are three issues that are either self-evident or otherwise universally accepted. One, the natural world and the world order display great diversity. Diversity exists both between and within groups, indeed between all individuals, all of them with legitimate identities that aggregate to the prevailing diversity. Point number two, to ensure our own survival, whether as individuals or as groups, there needs to be peaceful coexistence. Anything less threatens our survival, since a threat to one could eventually become a threat to all. Number three, dialogue is an important means to peaceful coexistence. Even where conflict already exists, dialogue is necessary to suspend or resolve the conflict in moving towards peace and peaceful coexistence. Dialogue is no less important before conflict breaks out. The question here before us, therefore, is what are the prospects for peaceful coexistence given our great diversity and for the dialogue needed to nourish and sustain it? However much people may talk about these values and virtues, and however much we may need them, they will not happen just because we wish them to. We have to work at it. To continue meaningful dialogue and to ensure peaceful coexistence require everyone's efforts. This will need to come from all sectors and all levels. Essentially, a diversity of responses pulling together as one. There also needs to be leadership, particularly of a policy nature. That means political vision, imagination, dedication, and commitment. It also means consistent application and courage. Political leaders must keep at it even when not in election season, even when disagreeable factions in their ranks reject negotiation, reason, and compromise. Political leaders should act as they speak and apply the fertile ideas in rightful policy action. Actions speak louder and truer than words. Good leadership motivates and inspires. True, effective leadership does both to preserve diversity and protect peaceful coexistence while facilitating dialogue. It will even risk unpopularity to press home an essential point, proving its commitment to principle. Much needed are clear thinking, forthright action, firm guidance, and enlightened policy making in the public interest. What future, if any, is there for diversity, dialogue, and peaceful coexistence? Where broad agreement at least exists for them, how can their future be assured? What are the prevailing needs and necessary responses? These are some of the questions that concern us here. On our diverse panel here, this session, we have three distinguished gentlemen from three different countries with much useful experience between them. Now, if I may introduce each of them briefly, starting with our first panelist, Professor Dato Shamsul Amri Baharuddin, Founding Director of the Institute of Ethnic Studies at University Kebangsaan Malaysia, or UKM, the National University of Malaysia, where he is also a distinguished professor of social anthropology. Professor Dato Shamsul has amassed more than 30 years of research and teaching experience with University Malaya, then UKM, and several academic stints abroad. He was Dean of the Social Sciences and Humanities faculty at UKM, later Director of the Institute of the Malay World and Civilization, and then Founding Director of the Institute of Occidental Studies. Our second panelist is Professor Ayatollah Sheikh Mahdi Hadawi Tehrani, Founding President of Porch of Wisdom Cultural Institution and Professor of Islamic Law and Philosophy in Iran. A prolific author, his research, teaching, and writing cover multiple subjects from theology, philosophy, and jurisprudence to logic, economics, and ethics. Professor Ayatollah Sheikh Mahdi has also been engaging with Muslim communities in Europe, Africa, and Asia. Among his many activities is supervising IslamQuest.net, which answers worldwide questions on Islam online in 13 languages. Our third panelist is Dato Ernest Bauer, Senior Advisor and Director of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Southeast Asia Program, and Pacific Partners Initiative. He is also President and CEO of Bauer Group Asia, a business advisory firm that he created. Dato Bauer was for a decade President of the US ASEAN Business Council, the top private business group comprising leading US companies in Southeast Asia. His many activities include being in the US chair of the Advisory Council on Competitiveness for the Vietnamese Prime Minister and serving on the board of the US-based Institute for Religion and Public Policy. Welcome, gentlemen. And if I may just add just one point before we begin. Because of the constraints of time and lunch is awaiting us, I will have to be a highly immoderate moderator in applying the rules of time limitations. Beginning with Professor Dato Shamsul Amri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to finish within 10 minutes. Today we have heard the Prime Minister, and then we have the first session talking about the possibility of initiating and rolling out this program called, or this massive international project called Global Movement of the Moderates. That reminds me, politically, in the international sense, we are not seeing the first of its kind. Yeah? In 1955, the Afro-Asian Conference, as a result of decolonization, there was the Bandung Conference. And then in 1961, led by Tito, we established the non-aligned movement, which is a response to the Cold War. And then in 1969, OIC was established as a result of the attack on Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Muslim countries thought they should get together and present themselves internationally. And now, after 9/11, 2001, there have been numerous bodies and organizations around the world which have tried to respond to what I call 1% problem, the problem of the extremists, being given 99% attention and leaving out the 99%. So we are today here trying to make sense. What do we do with the 99% and represent their voice, that 99% of Muslims at least? So in many ways, the attempt to create this, to champion this, whether it's a worthwhile cause or otherwise, it is up for us to judge. It's up for us to accept. It's up for us to implement. And I think, can I have this slide? The second slide, please. Now, what we have heard in the last couple of months since the speech by Prime Minister Najib at the United Nations General Assembly, when he launched this idea he was trying to, he was trying to pitch what I call the violent versus the moderate. And I believe that in the sociological sense, being moderate as opposed to being violent is the preferred, indeed the obvious choice for members of society to behave, both at the individual and the social collectives. However, in the political and governance sense, there is such thing called halal violence. For instance, the UN endorsed attack on the axis of evil based on falsification of data, resulting untold violent deaths and violent sufferings. But I'm sure the Prime Minister is not looking at that. He is looking at the focus of the present GMM is expressly on the sociological sense of the notion of the moderate and the moderateness, and emphasizing the roles of agency shaped by existing structures of peace. So it is, in a way, we are looking at, in a more sociological sense, when we talk about the moderate and moderateness, and we talk about its opposition, violent, is in a behavioral sense, not in a political, in a political military sense. Yeah. So this notion, what we are looking at, is he believes that in the sociological sense, if we listen to the speech carefully, he's arguing that for any society to survive and prosper in the long term, it has to find peace and stability through the creation of a state of equilibrium. This is the word that he used, the term and the concept that he proposes in his speech again and again and again. The concept, a state of equilibrium or balance within it, which in turn fosters moderateness and create the moderate. So PM Najib presents Malaysia as a showcase of moderate society. Now, we have heard this morning a debate or questions, is really Malaysia a good example of that moderateness? If it is, what is that in Malaysia can offer internationally? So these are the questions that have been raised this morning, even though the discussion is yet to finish. Yeah? So this presentation, my presentation, argues that the state of equilibrium does not in itself produces the moderates and moderateness in Malaysia. It is a result of something else. I would like to call it is the phenomenon of social cohesion that brought about the equilibrium, in turn the moderate and moderateness. I think there was a question from the floor about this. What is this that Malaysia is trying to offer? Or is this a good example? Is it enough for us to talk about moderate and developing moderateness beyond just rhetoric? Yeah? Now, let me briefly summarize the Malaysian experience of social cohesion that produces the equilibrium, that produces that moderate and moderateness. Social cohesion in Malaysia is about how the plural, fragmented and diverse components of the society, overwhelmed by opposites and contradictions, have been able, through a continuous process of negotiation, consensus and compromise at every level and section of the society, to rise above it in a most mature manner, to embrace peace and reject any form of violence for long-term mutual survival. If we look at this in the society in Malaysia, it doesn't mean when there is moderateness, when there is cohesion, it is a plain sailing situation. There are problems, there are issues that has to be resolved, there are grievances. We hear this every day. You don't have to read the newspapers. You read the blogs, you listen to TV stations and radios from abroad. You will know that we are full of grievances, unhappiness, but in a context embedded within what I call social cohesion. So it is this sort of moderateness with the acceptance of the difficulties, with the acceptance of the fact that we would agree to disagree, and here we are, in that sense, achieve what we want to achieve. So social cohesion is not unity, because we are fooled by this notion that unity is uniformity. It is a path, a precondition to unity. We may not achieve unity, but we desire unity. But what we have in the end is the social cohesion. So what Malaysia has achieved, which some countries have proclaimed Malaysia as a model nation, we feel very happy to be proclaimed as a model nation, but do we know what we have? Do we know? Can we explain what we have? Can we share in real, practical, concrete sense what we have? Not just proclaiming that what we have. So, and of course the Global Peace Index 2011 recognizes this. It is produced by the Institute of Economics and Peace in Sydney. So Malaysia is ranked 19 out of the 150 countries listed. I mean, we have a lot of comments and we have a lot of reservation when we talk about indexes of various kinds. But it's quite interesting for a country seen as problematic at the precipice of ethnic riot. We are number 19, just one step behind Australia. So that's quite significant, yeah? Because our greatest critics sometimes come from those regions. So it is interesting for us to actually understand this in perspective. Now, I would like to put in a diagram an article written by a Sri Lankan economist in a journal, South Asia Economic Journal, in 2008. He was trying to compare the economics of political conflict between Malaysia and Sri Lanka. I mean, this is just a comparison, a visualization what I've got from the article. So somebody else may interpret differently. But what I was able to see from this article, not written by a Malaysian who's trying to sell Malaysia, but by the Sri Lankan economist, and not even a political scientist or anthropologist like me. So perhaps we listen to economists a lot more, yeah? So that's why I believe that let's see what the economists have to say about this. Yeah? So we could see, he says, from 1945 to 2001, the red color, the yellow color is the intensity of conflict which has led to violence. Now, Malaysia seems to enjoy a relatively peaceful or a condition with less violence, if I want to put it that way. It's not free of violence, it's not total absence of violence, as opposed to the difficulties that our friends in Sri Lanka suffered for 23 years, which caused more than 150,000 deaths. So, if you look at this comparison, if you begin to see and ask questions, how come we manage to maintain that? Of course, we maintain this, but we also have continuously addressed problems and issues, from the simple problem of ethnic differences to problem of environment, and we are not going to deny that. But the question is, we still have yet to explain why we managed to sustain this. Now, I have no secret formula about this, even though we have Formula 1 in Malaysia. And for me, we have a social mold, a socially cohesive society, near absence of violence, not absence, but near absence of violence, plenty of tongue wagging, Malaysians like to argue to no end, not machete wielding, so we don't go around carrying our machete and try to fight.
Prof, please,
Yeah.
please sum up.
We talk conflict, we walk cohesion. That's basically what Malaysia has survived on. Now, finally, what do we have to offer? Really, what do we have to offer if we want to promote this global movement of the moderate? We had to create a package. And some of the ideas are there. And perhaps we have time to discuss this later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now let's move swiftly to the next speaker, His Excellency Professor Ayatollah Sheikh Mahdi Hadavi Tehrani. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin at-tayyibin wa ashabihi al-muntajabin. In the name of God, the Compassionate, the Merciful. The title of my speech is Multiculturalism, Intercultural Dialogue, Global Peaceful Coexistence, and Islamic Approach. In the preface, I have tried to mention some important points that diversity or multiculturalism is a natural phenomena. This issue demands a natural reaction, of course, and some of the reactions we can count, or some of them reject this fact, while this rejection does not change the reality. And some of them accept this fact neutrally without any effective approach, and some of them accept the fact with an effective approach. If we just survey the history, we will find a lot of wars and combats. The bloodiest one maybe was the World War II, millions of people killed and injured. This dark history still exists in Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine, etc. But there are some shining moments. The perpetual endeavor for peace and justice, the most important one, can be witnessed in the history of divine religions. The prophets are the heroes of this sense, of this theme. And the religions were the source of peaceful coexistence throughout the history. Unfortunately, I would like to emphasize in this point that some false interpretations misused them as a source of wars and conflicts. Extremism was the main obstacle for reaching to the real goal of religions, and it is still the main problem. Jewish extremism, Christian extremism, Islamic extremism, and also non-religious extremism, such as secular extremism, capitalistic extremism, and even liberalistic extremism, are the main role players in the most recent issues. They are all trying to force their own ideas and values on the others. Hence, the role of moderates is very essential, and as a Muslim scholar, I would like to introduce some features of Islam, Islamic moderate conceptions. In this connection, many questions arise. The first one is, what are the specific features of Muslim civilization? Second one, what could be the role of Muslim civilization in the global community? And third one, what is the relationship between the Islamic concepts and the multiculturalism? Is there any, and the fourth one and the last one, is there any capability in Islam for intercultural dialogue? About the first question, what are the specific features of Muslim civilization? I have explained in very brief words that in the course of almost 6 centuries, from 7 to 13 AD, Muslim civilization displayed its openness in a constant dialogue with the other cultures and civilizations. In the last instance, this openness was promoted by the spirit of religious and cultural tolerance prevailing in the Muslim state, which stretched from the Indus of Gibraltar. The Persian wisdom and Greek reason became component parts of the Muslim spiritual culture. And this was the Quranic notions. فَبَشِّرْ عِبَادَ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَهُ أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ هَدَاهُمُ اللَّهُ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمْ أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. There is good news for them, so give good news to my servants who listen to the word of Allah and follow the best one. They are the ones whom Allah has guided, and it is they who possess intellect. Persian thought and culture owes an immense depth to Islam as one of its primary springs of effluence. Islam embodies a universal wisdom. Each and every human individual living in each and every corner of time and place is potentially included in the purview of Islam. The Islamic emphasis on the essential human equality and its disdain for such elements as birth and blood has conquered the hearts of those yearning for justice and freedom. And what could be the role of Muslim civilization in the global community? I have explained the idea that despite various conflicts and wars between the Muslim world and the medieval Europe, as well as the various collisions within the caliphate in itself, Baghdad, Cairo, Nisabur, Ray, and Cordoba became the major cultural centers which defined the course of interaction with other civilizations at their own time. This openness to dialogue has precisely allowed medieval Europe to consider as a component of its own culture not only the heritage of antiquity received from Arabs, but also many achievements of classical Muslim in the fields of philosophy, science, and culture. And I have explained it in my paper, and it was supposed to be distributed among the audience. I don't know if it was done or not. That in the modern dialogue of civilization, a major role is allocated to the countries of the Muslim East. This is understandable. Historically, Muslim civilization was a component part of Mediterranean civilization, but the strengthening
extreme ideas are not scarce in the United States. We've got some very wild and strange ideas in the Republican Party right now. What's reassuring is that I think Americans still have faith that we have institutions and a system that will allow people to put those extreme ideas on the table. But the voters have to select their leaders. And if we select the wrong leader, we can throw them out in some term-limited fashion. And I think for our country, that's greatly reassuring. We have the same system, by the way, in our business sector. So when companies fail, like Enron, for instance, or WorldCom, they are brought to justice. They are dissolved. Their assets are broken up and put back into the market of ideas and capital so that they can be reconstructed. I'm not saying that American models are the right models for Southeast Asia. I'm saying that I have great hope that Southeast Asia is on the right path. I think the big opportunity here in 2012, and I hope Prime Minister Najib will think about focusing on this opportunity within ASEAN, is Burma, or Myanmar. Myanmar is clearly making a move towards democracy and moderation. And it's an example where I think by working together, countries around the world, particularly ASEAN, because Myanmar is your brother, it's in your neighborhood, but with the support of good policies from Europe, the United States, Northeast Asia, I hope that we can encourage a political transition in Myanmar that would be in favor of those empowered people, or the people that want to be empowered in that country. And that would be a great example, I think, of the global movement of the moderates. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Obawa. In the interest of time, I will not attempt to summarize any of the comments, so I'll just open it to the floor, and we have time for only a few questions, so please do not make speeches. Identify yourself very briefly and get straight to your point in your question, because we have lunch as well as the luncheon address by the Foreign Minister of Malaysia waiting. Questions from the floor? Oh.
Thank you. A quick question to the Professor Ayatollah, if I'm not mistaken. I have your paper here. My name is Syed Akbar Ali. I'm a writer, businessman from Kuala Lumpur. In your paper here, the last part says the concept of the Messiah. The concept of the Messiah. The concept of Messiah has been introduced in all divine religions. Why did you put this here? And have you identified, or do you know who this Messiah is going to be? Thank you.
Can we have another question, so we just take them in a group to save time? Yes, over there.
Good afternoon. My name is Mohammed Sabreen. I'm from Al-Ahram newspaper from Egypt. Is this, I direct my question to the gentleman from America. Do you see there is a shift in Europe and in America for more radical things, especially, in Europe with this difficult situation, and we notice a lot of bizarre ideas targeting Muslims and also the Arabs. I attend the first session, and people from the Middle East, they get more share of criticism regarding, what they contribute to the instability in the international arena. But let me argue. Do you think...
Your question, please.
Yeah, my question is...
no speeches.
Yeah, my question is this. Why the European and the Americans' democracy failed to punish Tony Blair and George Bush Jr. in invading Iraq and Afghanistan?
Thank you. Now, there's another question from the gentleman
thank you.
seated there. Thank you. Yes. Yes.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. العاجم الوريمي من تونس. السؤال المتدخل الأخير سيد أرنست، نحن نتحدث عن حركة عالمية للاعتدال، وأشار إلى الربيع العربي، ثم تحدث عن بلدان آسيا، ولاحظت بأنه عند الحديث عن بلدان آسيا وتجربة آسيا كأن هناك خلط. يعني ذكر الكثير من الدكتاتوريين الذين كانوا يقمعون شعوبهم وكانوا ينتهكون الحريات وينتهكون حقوق الإنسان ويرفضون المعارضة، وكيف نقبل هؤلاء ضمن الحركة العالمية للاعتدال، وكيف نعتبر أن تجاربهم السياسية السابقة تكون رصيدا لنا لبناء حركة عالمية للاعتدال، في حين أن هذا يعني يتنافى مع الاعتدال، إذ كانوا يمارسون الدكتاتورية وهي نقيض الاعتدال، بل أنهم يرفضون التنوع داخل مجتمعاتهم، وكانوا لنقول ذلك بكل صراحة وبوضوح كانوا وكلاء لقوى عالمية يكرسون سياساتها، فهم كانوا وكلاء للإمبريالية الأمريكية، كانوا يعني يقومون بالانقلابات لفائدتها، وكانوا يقمعون المستضعفين تكريسا لسياساتها، وكانوا امتداد لسياسة رأسمالية نتفق جميعا على أنها كانت منافية للعدالة. لا أدري ونحن نتحدث عن حركة عالمية للاعتدال كيف يكون هذا كله في رصيد الاعتدال.
Thank you. Just one more question if there's any. Okay, just that one. All right, thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. I would like to direct my question to Mr. Ernest. I'm Collins Chong, a student of International Strategic Studies from University of Malaya. I'd like to ask whether do you think that the spirit of moderation should be injected and directed towards the foreign policy decisions by the major powers to bring about a more peaceful and stable world, as we know that most of the decisions being made are being subject to harsh biases and also the influences of hawkish and extremist lobbies and so on and so forth. So do you think that this spirit of moderation should also be directed towards the foreign policy decision making by, especially by the major powers? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who likes to go first among the panelists? Prof? Or, okay.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. You have raised this question that why I have mentioned the idea of Messiah at the end of the paper, and I didn't find the chance to explain it, of course. I would like just to mention that if we refer to all the religions and even some cultures, we will find that the history will end in their point of view in a very good, a very glorious, a very positive point. And this positive point is the point of peaceful, justful globe. And I think it means that the movement of the humanity is towards this, and they all are looking for this glorious future. And this idea has been mentioned in Islamic ideology, Islamic notions and values, as the idea of Messiah. And this idea has been accepted by all the Islamic sects, and the idea of Mahdi have been introduced in all the Islamic sects. And this idea has been also mentioned in Christianity, Judaism, and also the other cultures, as I mentioned. And this is just a demand, a natural demand among the humanity to reach to this glorious future. And I think that the movements that now we are witnessing is a step towards this, inshallah.
Okay. Is this on? Yeah. I appreciate the questions. I don't speak Arabic, so I don't know if that question was to me. But it didn't sound like a question anyway, so maybe I got some feedback, so thank you for that. I would say that in terms of the foreign policy question and the strange ideas from the United States, I did admit this in my remarks, that there are some strange ideas in the United States, but we're not the only country that has strange ideas. Hopefully we have governance systems that protect those strange ideas from being put into action. And when they aren't, we will hopefully remove people who take those actions. So I hope that's the faith that we have to have in our governance in the United States. I think in terms of foreign policy, I do very much believe that moderation is important in foreign policy, and that compassion is also a part of foreign policy that should be woven into American foreign policy. I'll speak as an American. I think that we have to do a much, much better job of understanding and deepening our understanding and compassion for countries with whom we're dealing with. I hope you'd have a little bit of compassion too for the United States, because of the situation that we're in. It's a big country that has to, because of its position, is dealing with the entire world, and that's a tall order. We have to do better with it. I think we have an outstanding foreign service and national security architecture, but it's what the United States has to do in the next 10 and 20 years is deepen our understanding and engagement of the world. And we have to do that particularly in Asia. As President Obama and Mrs. Clinton have said, we're pivoting to Asia. What I worry about is we're pivoting to Asia in terms of our focus, but we have to pivot to Asia in our understanding of the cultures, religions, and people here to be a good partner for the long term. And that's a very important part of an enduring strategy for my country, not only in Asia Pacific, but globally. So thank you for the good questions.
Thank you, Dr. Prof. Shamsu.
I would like to draw our attention to the speech by the Prime Minister this morning, where he announced that he's going to have the Institute of Wasatiyah in the Prime Minister's department, and then he's going to create a chair for study of Wasatiyah, and then he's creating a yayasan, a foundation. I think there are two components to this idea of moderate, the concept of global movement on moderate. One is the ideational level, where we discuss, we talk like what we do today. But I think equally important is the practice level. Now, whose practices we want to practice? How do we come to terms with the different practices that we have seen around the world? And of course, claiming who is the best and who is not so good is not the way to do and to begin. But I think what we have to look simultaneously is the idea and the practice. And this is perhaps what the Prime Minister is trying to do, is trying to suggest. While we entertain this idea, and he champions what seems to be an ordinary idea, but he's championing it because there is also a possibility of that practice. And I think the example that he gave about Malaysia is just one example with that possibility, and there are many other examples and possibilities. So I think we have to bear in mind, we can go on talking about ideas here, and I think that's part of my job for many, many years. But there's also the job that I have to do is to roll out these ideas that people can actually participate, and people feel part of it. So I think that is the bigger challenge than having this process of going through these ideas. I think to put them into packages that we can actually do. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Just to round up, the idea of moderation is not confined to any particular religion, and not religion even as such, but you know, in all walks of life, in every activity that we engage in. Now the next session is actually lunch with an address by the Foreign Minister of Malaysia, Dr. Sri Anifah Aman, and the topic is Malaysia's foreign policy, moderation in action. So a round of applause for our panelists, please.
And another round of applause to our moderator, Mr. Bun Nagara. Thank you very much, Mr. Nagara, for trying very hard to abide by the time allocated. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we end our second session. And please proceed to the luncheon address. Lunch is provided next door. And please be reminded that the third session will begin exactly at 3 p.m. I seek your cooperation in making sure that everybody should be in the hall 5 minutes before time. Thank you very much. Please enjoy your meal.